Now, I want to introduce you to one of the most impressive people I know. I first met him maybe 15 years ago. It was one of those lunches with some economist from South America, had some ideas about solving poverty. I go to lunches like that because it bugs me that America's so rich. Well, most of the world is poor, and the world hasn't figured out a way to give them what it was that gave us the power to prosper. So I go to the lunch. I'm skeptical, but there sits Hernando de Soto of the Institute for Liberty and Democracy. It's a think tank based in Peru, and he starts pulling these pictures out of his briefcase. The pictures show slum dwellings built on top of each other, much like this. And de Soto went on to explain, well, I'll let you explain it. What do these pictures show?
These pictures show that roughly about 4 billion people in the world actually build their homes and own their businesses outside the legal system, so it's all haphazard and disorganized. But because of the lack of rule of law, the precision, the definition of who owns what, and because they don't have addresses, can't get the credit, can't get all.
What do you mean they don't have addresses?
Well, to get an address, somebody's got to recognize that that's where you live. That means that there's legal recognition. Legal recognition means property. When you've got property, you know you've got mailing addresses, and when you make a deal with someone, you can be identified. At the end, the first characteristic, the second characteristic of identity is your address. You go anywhere, they say, what's your name? And the second thing is, where do you live? Until property is defined by law, they can't get into the kind of deals or the division of labor, which is cooperation with other people to specialize and create wealth, because that's what makes you wealthy. The fact that you don't have to milk a cow every day, you don't have to work your land every day, you don't have to build your own house. You can stick to doing a TV program, or you can do this part of a BlackBerry, and the whole market puts it together. These guys can't. They've got to do their whole building, take care of it, and they can't specialize, and that's the reason of their poverty. The day that they get titled, the day that the businesses in their homes, the sewing machines, the cotton gins, whatever it is they've got there, the car repair shop, finally gets recognized, they can start expanding. They can start using scale.
But they need to be recognized by someone, local authority, who says this is yours.
They need to work within the law.
Many of these places barely have law.
That's right.
So they take a risk. They just work a deal with the guy on the first floor, and they build their house on the second floor?
That's right. Probably the guy on the first floor who had the guts to squat and make a deal with someone from government who decided to look the other way has got an invisible property right. You know, it's not very different from when you Americans started going west all the way to California. Like, for example, the California Gold Rush. The land didn't belong to them. Hey, the country didn't belong to them. It was Mexico. But you went in there, you put 800 mining claims association, 3 million Americans, big guns, and after a while you decided, why keep on shooting at each other? So between 1848, say 1856, and the beginning of the 20th century, you went out, created a private property system that brought in banks, and you created prosperity.
But California really got rich, and the rest of the world hasn't. What's the difference?
Because you Americans at that time were absolutely conscious of what the rule of law was about, and as people kept on moving from the East Coast to the West Coast, Washington, George Washington, your first president, called them banditti. You bandits don't have a right to be there. And Congress came around and said, oh, yes, they do. And you started awarding property on the basis of improvements.
We didn't always have deeds in America. Before deeds and rule of law, American settlers worked out their own generally accepted rights to property.
So in certain areas of the United States, they had tomahawk rights, which meant those areas where you shaved off part of a tree. Probably somebody else shaved part of the same tree to indicate that they had accepted it. In some cases where they grew corn, for example, the corn grew from here to there, and that established a right from here to there. So those were actually called corn rights. It was an improvement on the land that gave you the title to it because you had worked it.
China is still developing such property rights.
But in much of the countryside, the past prevails, and the land is owned collectively.
The whole notion of property rights has been pretty alien to formerly socialist countries, because right from the beginning, Marx said it. In the 19th century, property is theft.
But compare the countryside to cities like Shanghai.
I visited Shanghai about 30 years ago, and none of these buildings existed at that time. It's incredible what happens when you just change the rules of the game.
What should the rules of the game be?
The rules of the game have to say and recognize who really owns what. Because how you relate to the assets you have determines how you relate to your neighbor and the rest of the world. We work on paper and plastic, and if you don't have what you own on paper and plastic, you will not be recognized according to standard rules and you can't play the game.
This idea of a deed protecting property seems simple, but it's very powerful, allows all this commerce between total strangers that wouldn't happen otherwise. It applies to more than just skyscrapers and factories. We at Fox Business cover stock markets. DeSoto taught me that they only work because of deed-like paperwork that we trust because we have rule of law.
What I'm trading today is roughly 1,000 futures contracts. That represents about 40,000 head of cattle. I never see this cattle. I actually have never been outside of Chicago to the west to see where these animals are.
In the United States and Western Europe, your documents go to the market and practically work for you and think for you. In the developing countries and most of the former Soviet Union, the majority of people actually have to bring their animals to market. People in the developing world have cattle, land, and houses the same way they do in the Western world. What is missing is the rule of law.
And you say if they just had rule of law, they'd be as rich as we?
Oh, yes, of course. But let me tell you, bringing in the rule of law is no easy thing. You're trying it now in Iraq, you ain't getting there. You're trying in Afghanistan, you're not getting there.
You started your work in Peru, trying to establish property rights there. You were an economic advisor to the president, and you reformed permit laws to the extent that other countries now invite you to go to, you've gone to Russia, Libya, you met with Gaddafi. 23 countries, Egypt, Honduras, Philippines. So the leaders of these countries, they must get that they're doing something wrong.
They get it easier than a North American because, you see, the people who brought in the rule of law and property rights into the United States were in the 18th and 19th century. They were your great-great-great-great-granddaddies. You can't remember that. But in the case of these guys, they see that they're poor relative to your wealth. So it's easier for them to say, where's the difference? They're constantly looking for it so they can recognize it much faster. What we didn't realize over time was that the fact that you could determine that a piece of land went from there to here, you could also do it with a movie script. And you could also do it with an idea, with an invention. And once that there was certainty after who owned what, all of a sudden we started seeing that people trusted the paper more than the object itself, because we'd found through law ways of standardizing it and recognizing it. And on top of that, you built a stock market and you built all that leveraging, which has got you into some kind of trouble now, but without which you wouldn't have gotten where you are today.
Property rights gave us the power to prosper. Thank you, Hernando DeSoto.
Thank you, John.
We will be right back. All over America, there are parks that are filthy, dangerous, badly maintained. The governments in charge of them say, what can we do? Budget cuts took our money. We don't have enough for maintenance or security. That's what they say. So do we let the parks rot? Let them become havens for drug dealers, prostitution, violent crime? This park was known for that. And yet, now it's nice. It's Bryant Park, just a few blocks from the studio. What changed it? This man changed it. He's Dan Biederman. He essentially privatized the park. Now he wants to do the same thing to the Boston Common. And that's a terrible idea. It's just Shirley Kressel, a Boston journalist. So, Dan, you first. How'd you save Bryant Park?
Well, first, John, you've got to make the park great if it's going to attract private funding. So security, sanitation, horticulture, great lighting, and a lot of programming to draw people into the park at off hours so that it's always safe, because the best safety for park is not a tough security force, but a lot of people in it.
Private funding meant you got the businesses around the park to cough up the money.
Once the park was great, there were four principal sources: the businesses around the park, real estate owners, concessions, events, and sponsorships. And since 1996, we have not asked the city government for a single dollar.
Shirley, sounds good to me, and the park looks great. What's wrong?
Well, the park looks good, but it could be better, and it could be public.
Well, what's
now,
wrong with sucking the money from private businesses, as Dan does?
Because it goes into private pockets.
So what?
This is because it's very good to use, for Dan, to use the public land for running a private business, a rent-a-park, where, you know, all year round there's commercial revenue from renting it out to businesses. He keeps all that money. People don't realize that. I was in the park yesterday. I walked around. I did a little survey. I asked 20 people if they thought this money was going to the city, and they all think it is. So.
But so what if they think it's going to Mars? The park's nice, and the taxes aren't being hit for it.
It wouldn't hit the taxes, and because we have the money left over, and the park could be just as good.
Well, Shirley, it certainly is true that the park is very commercial these days. We were just there. There's lots of buying and selling going on. The day I was there must have been 100 booths selling food and holiday gifts. Very commercial. On the other hand, the public seemed fine with that.
Well,
they've done it up nicely. You know, if it was just ragtag stalls that didn't look very nice, that'd be a different story.
They're doing a lot of the things that they should be doing to, you know, make the city some money.
Make the city some money. You should ask. You should do it.
Make a Dan some money.
Yeah, that's right. You should do a little study.
You feel
and
bad about that?
If everybody would feel just as good about it if they knew where the money was going.
It's delightful that the public thinks this is a city-run park. That means it's very public. Nobody has viewed it as privatized. And the final answer to these arguments is every dollar that's earned by concessions and sponsorships and events in Bryant Park goes right back into the park. All of that money is earned in these ways. And the way we can afford to provide private skating, public skating for free, which we do, is from those booths and from a sponsorship from Citi, which has been very generous. CITI.
All right, well, let's talk about your next fight. Let's talk about Boston. The Boston Common was once a common grazing field, a common in the 1600s. It suffered the tragedy of the commons. It was overgrazed. Now it's a park. It's been managed by government for about 400 years. Badly managed, and this is the result. So, Dan, your plans?
Well, the last thing we want to do is privatize Boston Common. Boston's not New York. There, it's not as commercial a district. There, John, we are in the position of coming up with ways to greatly augment the city's budget, which everyone involved feels is inadequate.
So get the people around the park to pay most of the money.
And no, private companies, the Central Park model is a little tougher to...
The Central Park model, just for clarity, and I have a bias here, I'm on the board of the charity that helps manage Central Park. I joined people because I saw what they did to Central Park. Here are some before and after pictures. When government managed Central Park, it was barren and dangerous. And now it's wonderful. But the model is that I give money, people who live around there just give money. It's not a business arrangement. You're doing some mixture of that in Boston, as you're proposing.
Correct. It would be a mixture. You can get a lot of money from private sector companies from sponsorships where they don't demand a billboard. They demand almost nothing. You give them a little small plaque of attribution, and they will put a lot of money into the park. What's wrong with that?
Well, yeah, we already have the plutocrats, and now we're going to get the corporations. The best of both worlds. First of all, it's not. The point isn't what the size of the billboard is. The problem is that we don't need to do this, and we don't need to.
What's the harm in doing?
To teach our next generation of children that the only way they can get a public realm is as the charity ward of rich people and corporations. We can afford our public realm. We're entitled to it. We pay taxes, and that's the government's job. This is not a model. This is not a model.
It's a good model.
It's not a model. We have to hold our government accountable.
I don't know what will happen in the rest of the
reason not
country.
to.
It's working in Central Park. It's working in his New York City park. Why not try it in Boston?
Well, it's working for your corporations, and it's working for your billionaires.
It's working for the public.
It's not, because these people, the money bags, get to decide how the park is used and who goes there and who
do they keep out,
and who the desirables are and who are the undesirables.
Who are the undesirables that are kept out?
Undesirables are primarily homeless people, which are always the first thing on the list of how to deal with the homeless people.
Want more homeless people in the parks?
Well, homeless people have to be somewhere. If we don't make a system that accommodates people who don't have a place to live, they have to be in the public realm. I think unless you can suggest something better.